Back you with Newsfeed. All right. Well, more reaction, of course, to the medium-term budget policy statement. With us here in our studio, Newzroom Afrika. He is an economist. He's been watching it very, very closely. He's been gauging the reaction that's been coming in through the afternoon as well. Newzroom, let's get some reaction from Dr. Christie Viljoen, an economist at PwC. Dr. Viljoen, good afternoon to you, and I appreciate your time. I know that your diary will be full this afternoon after watching the medium-term budget policy statement and going through the documents. I mean, there's not a lot of good news around when you look at our economy. The Minister finding a little bit with the tax take, but otherwise painting a pretty difficult picture in most respects.
Yes, I mean, for the first budget, it's certainly challenging in certain areas for the new finance minister. We're coming out of a recession. We're sitting with load shedding that's just popped up again and seems to be with us for quite some time again. And we've got a big fiscal deficit, so it's challenging for him. On the other side, there's certainly some good news. We saw a big increase in fiscal revenues compared to what was expected earlier this year, mostly because mining companies have benefited from higher commodity prices. And we've also seen, at least from the finance minister's side, he's keeping to the course of wanting to narrow the fiscal deficit, wanting to put it back on a sustainable basis. So as with all budgets, as with all mini budgets, medium-term budgets, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the finance minister that needs to balance all of these elements.
And Newzroom Afrika, you've been watching this as well. I mean, I know that you'll have views for Dr. Viljoen. I mean, obviously a tricky position for the finance minister.
Indeed, and I think what would be interesting is it's all good and well, but what are some of the associated risks then with this medium-term budget policy statement that we need to be cognizant of? Because I think that's where the hard work would need to be done to mitigate against in this instance.
It would seem, Dr. Viljoen, to pick up on that point. I mean, one of the questions is there enough in it? I mean, is there enough to actually get us out of the hole that we're in? I'm not sure that there is.
Well, I mean, from a fiscal side, the news is good. The fiscal deficit and the debt ratios, they look better, mostly because of the GDP reweighting. So the way we calculate those actually look better now after Stats SA reweighted those GDP numbers. There is some positive moves. There's actually a plan to cut government spending next year, which is actually unprecedented. It's obviously coming off a base now for this year. We've got this more than 100 billion in extra revenues. But the fact that the finance minister is looking for a cut in fiscal spending in 2022-23 is actually good news in terms of getting government finances back to a more sustainable level. Now, obviously, we always look at the budget speeches to sort of help save the economy. And the finance minister admitted that there's a lot that needs to be fixed. We know about load shedding. It's probably number 1, 2, and number 3 on any list of what to fix in the economy. And he again emphasized we need structural reforms. There's a long list of things that need to be fixed, that need to be done to get this economy growing at a faster pace. So I would say the biggest risk to the current fiscal framework is that we don't see the economic growth from next year onwards that supports the revenue expectations. We've seen this many, many times in the past decade, that economic expectations are simply not met because the policies we need are not implemented. So to answer that question, what's our big risk with this fiscal framework is that our economy is not growing fast enough and it's not creating the jobs that we need fast enough. That's for me the biggest concern.
I mean, within all of that, of course, you'd have been watching the debate around the basic income grant. The minister indicating that it's very important, not necessarily even hinting at a direction. I can't blame him. We know that he's pretty much against the basic income grant, or he has been certainly in his interviews quoted in public. For you, Dr. Viljoen, is a basic income grant a risk?
It is certainly a risk. We have to immediately now, just a few hours after the budget was delivered, start looking at what's happening in Feb, when the main budget is delivered. So we have to shape our expectations going that way. We've just finished with municipal elections, which had a result that I think for the ruling party would probably tell them we need to think about our economic policy a bit differently. We need to think how we spend differently. So we've got the situation where just a few months from now, we've got the main budget where usually you see the big announcements, the big spending announcements. So everyone is thinking, maybe in 4 or 5 months' time, we know more about this basic income grant, and the money will have to come from somewhere. Whether you tax people on the high income scale more, whether you take it from the general government revenue pool, it needs to come from somewhere in order to spend it. So there's that interplay between the political risk or the political motivation behind this basic income grant and then the economic reality of where do we actually get this money from. So it's certainly a risk. It is something that we need to keep an eye on because there are several government departments involved. And we know when something like this happens across different departments, there are different views, different philosophies, there's different documents. So most certainly it's not a clear-cut case when we see a basic income grant, if we do, what it will look like, who will get it, what the value would be. We just know that it is something that's probably on the horizon. It's probably going to get lots of debating over the next few months. And I think that they'll have to give us something in February with the main budget. Whether it is just a comment on there isn't going to be a basic income grant, or whether there is going to be one, what the timeline is, what more detail is about that.
The governing party that got 46%, under 50% in the last local government elections, Dr. Viljoen. I hate to be cynical, but I suspect the balance may be that there will be one. Within all of this, you can't really grow an economy without functioning infrastructure, and there is, I think, a war on our infrastructure at the moment in many, many ways. Lots of sort of detail about how there's going to be more money spent on it, but our infrastructure is also holding us back.
Definitely. The easiest way to save government spending is to cut back on infrastructure. So when times are tough, you have to pay salaries, you have to fund the hospitals, you fund the schools. So you cut back on things like roads and dam walls and that kind of thing. You sort of save your money on infrastructure. Problem is, infrastructure is your long-term growth support. So we are obviously now seeing, not just at Eskom, but in other places as well, the result of cutting back on infrastructure spending and maintenance over, let's call it the past 5 years, maybe a bit more, where the economy is now suffering because we had to make trade-offs a few years ago. Now we're making more trade-offs and have to think a few years ahead how the economy is going to suffer from that as well. So yes, infrastructure is maybe an easy way to save money if you cut back on building a few bridges, but in the end, the medium to long-term growth prospects are negatively affected. We are obviously within an economic recovery period where the government has said it will be infrastructure-led. To be honest, there isn't really extra money being put infrastructure compared to what we were seeing before COVID-19. So it's a bit tricky to really see this as an infrastructure-led growth recovery. But the bottom line is, even if you just need to spend on the infrastructure you have to keep the economy going, we are lagging behind that. It's something that government obviously wants to fix, and it's got lots of good ideas and good plans in place and structures forming around the investment fund. But as with several other big things in South Africa, like another round of solar panels being put up in different places, it takes a long time to get the policy right, to get the construction done. So we are stuck in a situation where the things we need right now will probably only arrive next year or the year thereafter in order to boost the economy.
Dr. Christie Viljoen, thank you. PwC, economist at PwC. Let's just pick up on that infrastructure point with Ndumiso Khadebe. He, of course, the economist at KH Research Equity Partners. It's been a pleasure to have you with us this afternoon, Ndumiso. I mean, the point is that you can't have a functioning economy without infrastructure. Look at what's happened to our railways. You can almost see our economy disappearing before our eyes.
Indeed, infrastructure is quite important, and a solid implementation plan is important for a number of reasons, Stephen. Primarily because of the multiplier effect that infrastructure projects have, specifically for lowly skilled individuals in the construction sector. So already you're able to take care of a large number of South Africans who don't have a sophisticated skill set to be able to be employed in that sector. But additionally, it also promotes the ease of integration and the mobility of goods and services, which we have seen the impact and the importance of that in the July riots. And as a consequence of that, that's quite important. Then there's the financing aspect, which is quite critical, which was mentioned before. Yes, there's the infrastructure fund. Yes, of course, we know that the allocation has been made in accordance to that, but there's also the implication of how local government then is able to manage such catalytic projects at a local government level. One of the key challenges, which I think is quite important to have an outlook of it in the medium term, is how do we respond to this question of bolstering capabilities at local government level when it comes to financials. The minister mentioned that over R1 billion is being spent in financial consultants for financial reporting, of which it is an internal function for at local government level. But that's certainly where these activities transpire. And I think for me, it's certainly one of the low-hanging fruits. If we certainly focus there and focus our strength there, that will certainly ensure that the investment projects that are made are able to have a greater chance at yielding the outcomes that are envisaged.
Ndumiso Khadebe, thanks for being with us this afternoon.